Mr. President.
The senator from New York.
Are we in a quorum, Mr. President?
Yes.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise this afternoon to talk about the economic recovery package, a package that will create jobs, put money in the pockets of the middle class, and strengthen our investment. Three extremely worthy and necessary goals. It is a package that will turn our economy around, and Lord knows we need it. Let me say, I've heard much talk from the other side claiming that they are against this package because it increases the budget deficit and the national debt too much. For instance, I heard my good friend from Arizona this morning talking about generational theft. There's one surprising thing, Mr. President. When we talked about $1 trillion against the war in Iraq, all told, we never heard about generational theft. When we talked about $2 trillion, when President Bush talked about $2 trillion of tax cuts, mainly for the wealthy, did we ever hear the word generational theft? Did we ever hear that we should not do tax cuts for the wealthy or fund the war in Iraq because it was generational theft, because it would increase the deficit? No, we didn't. I'm not commenting on whether those two actions were worthy or not, but we certainly didn't hear any qualms from the other side. The GOP was a borrow and spend party for each of the 8 years that President Bush was in office. They doubled the national debt in 8 years and by some estimates added $30 trillion to future liabilities over 8 years. Our friends on the other side of the aisle simply have no credibility when it comes to the issues of deficits and debt, because until 3 months ago, they didn't give a hoot about it. Only now, when there is government programs for education and health care and transportation, do we hear about government debt. But we never hear about it when it comes to funding wars overseas like Iraq, when it comes to tax cuts on the wealthy. That's perfectly okay. Well, where were our colleagues on the other side of the aisle for the last 8 years as the debt skyrocketed, as generational theft occurred? Where was my good friend from Arizona, who talked about this earlier today when I was on the floor?
Would the gentleman yield?
I would only yield since I only have 5 minutes on the gentleman's time.
I'd be happy to yield on my time.
I'd be happy to yield to my
just
colleague.
a question.
Without objection.
The senator paints with an awfully broad brush. I've been in this Senate for 4 years. He knows very well. I've voted against most appropriation bills. I've talked about the debt in almost every speech I've given. So I would hope that we would talk about individuals rather than a group, because it's not necessarily representative of all on that side.
I think my colleague from Oklahoma, reclaiming my time, makes a fair point. There have been occasional members, like the gentleman from Oklahoma, the senator from Ohio, the senator from Maine, Ms. Snow, who have talked repeatedly about increasing the debt. But by and large, the speeches we've heard this morning and this afternoon, the votes we have seen from the other side of the aisle, both under George Bush and now, we didn't hear much talking about generational debt.
Does my friend yield for a second?
Well, I'd be happy to yield on my colleague's time. I only have 3 minutes left.
Sure, I would ask him a question.
If I could, on my colleague's time.
Yes. Does my friend recall that for many years under President Bush, the Republican leadership told us how imperative it was to completely repeal the estate tax, which would cost this nation $1 trillion over a 10-year period? $1 trillion. And who are the beneficiaries of that tax break? The top 0.3%. We're spending $800 billion, including tax breaks for the middle class, rebuilding this country. What does my friend think about $1 trillion for the top 0.3%, as opposed to putting money into the middle class and working families?